Captain Thorne paced the deck of the Crimson Blade, his eyes scanning the horizon. The pirate ship had seen many battles and many victories, each one marked by a black flag painted onto the console of his bridge station. The crew knew the plan well: infiltrate, sabotage, and plunder. It was a tried-and-true method that had earned them riches and a reputation for being the most capable of pirates. Most of the time they didn't even have to fire a shot. Their inside man sabotaged the ship, blocked access to the ship's weapons locker, and then the pirate ship arrived and claimed the cargo. It had earned them quite a reputation. Their tried-and-true method was effectively very simple. They would find a good spot to land or orbit and wait. The chosen location would be within 10 days' travel of as many space stations as possible. Then through agents at those stations or spies sent to those stations they would find out what ships and what cargoes were coming and going. The first requirement being would the ship pass by or be in range in time while at a vulnerable point for the pirates to spring their trap. The second requirement was traveling alone. Raiding military convoys or guarded transport ships was a job for dumber pirates. The third requirement was a cargo worth taking. Some cargoes were just more trouble than they were worth. This would reduce the possible targets to a reasonable number, and the officers of the Crimson Blade could then debate the merits of the remaining. There were 20 ships to consider. Normally there would be a debate among the officers about which ship to target based on different opinions, but this time there was one and just one that stood out above the others. It was a human-registered ship. The humans were new to the galactic neighborhood and so far had a reputation as diplomats and merchants. It was a favorable sign and would be the first human ship to be claimed. It would also be easy to get someone on their ship as a crew member. The curious and often naive humans seemed anxious to learn about other species. To make this group of humans seem even more naive, there was a rumor they brought children as part of the crew, and their ship had a massive yellow flower of some type painted on the hull of the ship. The crew of the Crimson Blade almost felt sorry for the poor humans. This didn't even seem like a challenge, which made them the best of targets. An accomplice on the station would feel out if any crew needed help in any area. He was a well-paid informant and was all too happy to tell the pirates that the human vessel was running with new sensors, tech they had installed by another species and didn't fully understand the ins and outs of yet. That was the cue for Wiener. He was a Slen and his biological needs were similar enough to the humans he would be comfortable on their ship. The Slen were much like humans in many respects, evolved from mammals of some variety. Exact comparisons get difficult world to world. Of more importance, the Slen, like everyone else, was more advanced than the humans, and Wiener was very comfortable with sensors from operation to maintenance. It would be easy to get him into the crew. It would even be easy for Wiener to send hidden messages out through the sensor array that the humans probably wouldn't even suspect was possible. Most sentients were cautious and would be wary of strange crew members offering to join up, especially after taking on a valuable cargo. Not the humans. Wiener barely had to express an interest in joining the crew when the humans seemed overjoyed at the offer. The humans were not used to Slen body language, but even they picked up on how surprised he was at their acceptance. The captain of the human vessel simply said, "Southern hospitality is alive and well." Wiener shook his head. Humans and their odd ways of speaking. Wiener had been told they were traveling with children, but he didn't believe it till the captain introduced his daughter Rose. The half-sized human seemed friendly, irritatingly so. Wiener had never seen a merchant craft that was naive enough to have children on board, another sign this was going to be a ridiculously easy prize. Yes, there were children in space, tourists in safe, well-patrolled areas, even colonists usually still in well-patrolled areas. But as a pirate in an area where piracy was common, a child on board seemed the height of ignorance. The space station was a no-weapons area, so the human captain and crew that he saw, and of course the child, were all unarmed, as was Wiener. All of this was normal. Everything was going according to plan, and if anything was going better than expected. And just like that, day one of Wiener's mission began. He was led on to the human ship. The quick tour revealed just how primitive the ship was. The humans had no business wandering around the galaxy in such an antique. They had a workout room, something that was a requirement in primitive ships but rarely seen in more advanced ships. Next to the workout room was a door with a series of warning signs on it, as well as some script in their language. He assumed it was the ship's locker and made a mental note of it. As the tour went on, he was shown the infirmary, his cabin, the cafeteria, the refresher station, life pods, and the ship's locker. He was confused for a moment but couldn't ask the crew if it would be too suspicious to bring up. At the end of the tour, he went to work on the sensor array. A human female named Callie hovered over him, clearly wanting to learn all she could from Wiener as he worked on and adjusted the sensors. The Molnari sensors were very good, which made them seem out of place on the primitive human ship. The installers had taken some typical shortcuts that limited their effectiveness, and he fixed that, partly because he needed them at their best to send coded messages out as soon as Callie took a break. Wiener was quick to report to Thorne, "I have my own cabin, located ship's locker, all is to plan." As Callie returned, Wiener noticed she was carrying something concealed at a guess, a bladed weapon on her lower leg and a small energy weapon at her waistline. It was concealed well. Years of being a pirate was the only reason he had noticed it at all. One general rule of thumb in spacecraft: weapons were usually stored in the locker during travel and only broken out when needed. Wiener smiled politely and said nothing, and then turned in for the night. Captain Thorne received the report and smiled as his ship began traveling to intercept the human freighter. On the second day, Wiener made his way to the cafeteria. The ship's medical officer, who was called simply Doc, seemed overly cheery for first thing in the morning. "Wiener, right? You are my first slan. Is it okay if I ask some medical questions? Also, I would love to give you a physical exam, mostly for my own curiosity." The captain clears his throat, and Doc gave him a look. "You can't blame me for being curious. I'm sorry if it comes across as rude. Knowing where primary organs and such could be instrumental in saving your life after all." Wiener, in the name of seeming friendly, began explaining the basics of slan biology. He got caught up in being helpful about the topic when he realized everyone was paying attention. Considering where certain organs are in the body can be used for targeting, he suddenly felt very uneasy about revealing the information. As breakfast ended, the source of his uneasiness became more obvious. Everyone in the cafeteria was armed. And it wasn't just that they were armed, it was a variety of weapons. One of the engineers carried a Frexen stun baton on his hip. The captain had a Molnari pulse pistol. Doc was wearing a Loxus needler. This all felt very wrong. This was just not normal. As he went about his day, he saw Rose. To his surprise, she was wearing a holster with a Roxen blaster. Wiener smiled. "That's a cute toy you have." Rose made a sound and an expression and then motioned him to follow. She led him past the workout room to the room he had thought was a ship's locker. The room turned out to be a long, narrow hallway. She drew her toy and adjusted the power setting, the toy looking more and more real by the second. Ready, she hit a button, and little targets popped up from the ceiling and walls and floor, and she began shooting them with surprising accuracy. Wiener stared on in shock as the child showed off her marksmanship with what was clearly a very real and very dangerous weapon. He complimented her and then, trying to look normal, went about his duties. At the end of the day, he reported to Thorne, "Something is wrong. The humans are all armed. I don't know if they are onto me or not, but every single one of them is armed. Even the little girl is a marksman." Captain Thorne received the report and wondered if Wiener was cracking under the pressure. It was just humans. He wondered if he had chosen poorly or if he would need to risk sending a communication back to Wiener to calm him down. Day 3 began and Wiener knew he had to find out what was going on. As he saw Callie arrive in the sensor room, "Are we expecting trouble? I see lots of weapons out instead of in the ship's locker." It seemed like a perfectly reasonable observation. He hoped it didn't come across as suspicious. Callie laughed softly. "The ship's locker? Oh, we use that for the important stuff. Emergency rations of food, water, air, parts for essential systems, and I think the captain keeps some big weapons in there, the silly stuff, explosives and anti-vehicular weapons. Why would anyone want to put sidearms in the locker?" She looked Wiener up and down. "It's okay if you don't carry a weapon, I don't." She smiled, though the baring of teeth didn't seem friendly at this point. It only made matters worse that Wiener knew Callie was always carrying at least 2 concealed weapons. Wiener tried not to look too shocked. Was she onto him? He thought to himself. He shook his head and tried not to mumble, "Oh, it's just customary for most species." Callie laughed again. It was a friendly laugh, but Wiener wasn't familiar enough with humans to be sure, and then she said something cryptic. Separating a Texan from a weapon is not such an easy task. Then she continued with her work. Wiener laughed nervously and once again found the humans and their turns of phrases irritating and confusing. Were they naive or was it confusing on purpose? It took him a minute to realize she said anti-vehicular weapons and explosives. Was she joking? Why would merchants and diplomats need explosives and heavy weapons? Surely, she was joking. She had to be. When he got a chance, he reported it to Thorne. "We need to abort. They are all armed and seem prepared for any interaction." As the report came through, Captain Thorne replied in a short burst message, "You need to calm down and stick to the plan. We are not aborting." He didn't risk a longer message. The worst part of space travel was the short flight from the gravity well where stations or planets would be to the access point to the galactic web where wormhole creation and travel was possible. The travel time in this case was 7 days, and today was just day 4. Wiener's unease grew. The crew all seemed friendly enough. Granted, Wiener didn't have a clue what some body language meant, and the humans used a surprising collection of slang, idioms and euphemisms which made knowing the language useless at times. As he entered the cafeteria for his midday meal, Rogers, one of the engineers, was explaining where the choke points on the ship were. The man had a horrific smile as he explained the best way to space pirates should they get boarded in different locations throughout the ship. Wiener sat and tried not to look suspicious or worried as he was, hoping his body language was as foreign to them as theirs was to him. Rogers sounded like he wanted the ship to be boarded, as if that were what would make the trip worthwhile. There were plenty of empty fake braggarts among pirates, and then there were the heart sentients. Wiener got the impression Rogers was the latter. Wiener felt a cold pit in his stomach. This was going to be a disaster. That's when the captain said, "Well, Rogers, you aren't going to get your chance unless the rocks and weapon systems completely fail." As the rest of the crew laughed, and Rogers looked almost sad, all Wiener could do was wonder what rocks and weapon system? The ship looked unarmed. It was after he said it, he realized he had asked it aloud rather than as a thought inside his head. The captain smiled broadly. "Don't worry about pirates, we are the most heavily armed ship in the system." The crew, as if knowing what was coming next, said in unison, "Top of the line." We spared no expense, laughing as they said it. The captain looked irritated and then laughed with them. Wiener could only nod as if that reassured him. This was looking worse and worse by the second. He returned to the sensor array and thought about taking targeting offline, only to realize weapon targeting didn't use this sensor array. As Callie took a break, he reported to Captain Thorne, "You need to abort, they are armed, ship is armed, we need to abort." Captain Thorne, more and more disappointed in Wiener, didn't alert the crew to his reports and his clearly failing nerves. Captain Thorne found himself risking contact again. "Negative, Wiener. We can't afford to back out now. Find a way." "That's an order." Day 5 began. The ambush point was just a day closer, and more he didn't know what to do. He couldn't make them sensor blind. As Callie joined him in the sensor room, he risked asking, "Should we tie all the ship's weapons into primary sensors?" She gave him a look which, even with his limited understanding of human body language, seemed suspicious. Wiener's heart pounded in his chest. He felt like the plan was doomed. When things went to plan, the saboteur would sabotage sensors or weapons or engines and then block access to the ship's locker. He couldn't freely go to the other areas. The sensors had multiple redundancies and the whole crew was armed down to the little girl. Later in the day, Wiener noticed a change in the crew's behavior. They were more guarded around him, their conversations stopping abruptly when he approached. He knew he had to send a final message to Thorne, warning him that the plan was falling apart. Callie seemed to hover even more over him as he worked. Where before she had questions to ask, she seemed quieter, like she was watching him to watch him rather than watching him to learn. He risked keying in a message. Sending a message through the sensor array could be very discreet and look like a simple diagnostic task. He messaged Captain Thorne, "Captain, they suspect me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're too vigilant. We need to abort the mission." Keeping the way the message more discreet, an obvious sign not to reply to it. Captain Thorne received it and contemplated murdering Wiener on sight. This was a simple run on a group of primitive humans that had conned the Slen sensor operator. It had to be that simple. Day 6 arrived and the tension on the Yellow Rose was palpable. Wiener could feel the eyes on him, the suspicion growing. He tried to act normally, going about his duties. He couldn't shake the feeling they were onto him and this whole thing was doomed. An opportunity came sooner than he expected. The engineers seemed busy with something, and he was able to slip down and into the primary power plant. The ship might have looked primitive and human on the outside, but on the inside, the Molnari sensors, the rocks and weapons, and now Aloxis power plant all seemed state-of-the-art. Rogers stepped into the power plant room and glared at Wiener. Rogers was easily the biggest of the humans on board, carrying a Frexen stun baton on one hip and a large human slug thrower on the other. The man glared at Wiener. "Something I can help you with?" Rogers rested his hand on the butt of the pistol, and as he did, Wiener noticed the scratch marks on the holster. At first glance a few days ago, he had thought it was wear and tear or a design. Now it looked more like kill marks. Some of the pirates in Captain Thorne's crew did that. He babbled, "Sorry, I detected power fluctuations in sensors and wanted to check it out." Rogers nodded and smirked knowingly. "Oh, and did you find the source?" Wiener shook his head. "I think it was a random fluctuation. I'm going to return to sensors." Rogers nodded again, his hand almost caressing the butt of his pistol as he nodded and stepped out of Wiener's way. Wiener's mind raced as he hurried out of the power plant room and back to his sensor station. Wiener swallowed hard as he nervously made his way back to the sensor station. He almost walked into Rose. The half-sized human looked up at him and smiled. In a surprisingly calm tone and with a silly expression on her face, Daddy says we are nearing a pirate risk zone, but don't worry, Daddy and Rogers say we are the most armed ship in the system, she giggled. Wiener found her confidence oddly terrifying. A child thought the danger of pirates was an easy-to-handle matter. That degree of confidence was either arrogant or practiced confidence, and the ship and crew were slowly more and more seeming like the latter. Wiener made it back to the sensor station. He keyed in the secure frequency and tapped the coded message quickly. Captain, they've got me under surveillance. They don't believe my cover story. I need extraction. Captain Thorne received the message and felt the need to risk replying. We're close, Wiener. Hold on just a little longer. We'll signal when we're ready. Wiener realized there was no stopping the attack. It was going to be a bloodbath, and there didn't seem to be a way to avoid it at this point. Feeling abandoned by the single-minded Captain Thorne, he knew what he had to do. Wiener left the sensor station and made his way to the bridge. Captain Hollis? He held his hands up to show off. Unlike everyone else on board, he was not armed. You need to change course. There are pirates ahead, specifically Captain Thorne. He is laying in wait near where you will most likely try to open your wormhole. Wiener took a deep breath. My name is Wiener. I'm a pirate. My crew sent me here to infiltrate your ship and sabotage it. Captain Hollis's eyes narrowed, and he tapped the console. Callie, check the sensors. Rogers to the bridge. It seems our pirate is coming clean. Wiener frowned. You knew? Captain Hollis nodded and spoke into the ship's intercom. Michaels, start a sweep of the ship just to be sure. Wiener looked on with a worried look. I tried to warn them off. Change their mind. They will attack tomorrow as you set up for your wormhole run. Captain Hollis smiled. It was unnerving for him to be so unfazed. Well, you need to send your Captain Thorne one more message, don't you? Wiener's eyes widened in surprise. What do you mean? Captain Hollis leaned forward, his expression hard. You have a choice, Wiener. We have an airlock where you can wait for this to play out. If you cooperate, we can let you go when the fight is over. If you don't, we can let you go sooner. Wiener looked puzzled. Humans, their turn of phrases were getting annoying, he thought. Captain Hollis smiled, and there was no warmth to it. If you don't cooperate, we are going to space you. It's just easier cleanup that way. Wiener swallowed hard. If Captain Thorne was successful, he would do far more than space him, but what choice did he have? All right, I will cooperate. Captain Hollis nodded. Good. Welcome to the Yellow Rose. Rogers escorted Wiener back to the sensor station, and one last message was sent. Ship's locker is blocked. Power plant should short when they establish wormhole. Rogers escorted Wiener to an airlock and showed him in. Most airlocks lead to an escape pod or were meant for loading cargo. The airlock Wiener was shown into was the latter. With the push of a button, he would be spaced like unwanted cargo. It didn't take Wiener but a moment to realize their idea of a jail cell was a button away from being a death sentence. Granted, his chances were still better like this than with Captain Thorne. Meanwhile, Captain Thorne got the message he had been waiting for and expected. He didn't know what had gotten into Wiener, but he was glad he found his spine and got back to work. His crew was ready, or so they thought. The big yellow flower on the side of the primitive human ship had been the source of much ridicule over the past few days. Wiener noticed from the little viewport in the airlock the ship was not changing course. He tried to get their attention, but the crew was busy. He felt the ship vibrate as the 20 weapon emplacements uncovered, but he couldn't tell what that was. There was a familiar whine throughout the ship as the power plant strained to generate the wormhole. All Wiener could do was watch through a very tiny porthole and worry about what was going to happen. He had thought the humans would bypass the trap, flee, call for support. Now he wondered if they were just crazy. Captain Thorne's ship flew into view, its weapons training on the human ship. Captain Thorne thought everything was going to plan as he established communications with the human ship. Primitive Earth vessel prepares to be boarded or destroyed. He was so confident in his threat the one-word reply puzzled him. Captain Hollis replied simply fire. Thorne stared at the communications officer and only then realized that Hollis was giving an order, not a reply. The pirate's sensor officer called out brace for impact. Human ship's energy weapons made direct hits on engines and the power plant. His navigator called out battle damage as the first barrage hit. A moment later the missile weapons hit, taking out weapon systems. In less time than the pirates thought they would be claiming their prize, they were adrift and leaking atmosphere. Captain Hollis broadcast throughout the ship as he radioed the space station and reported the incident. He wanted Wiener to know the authorities had been contacted. Galactic Authority ships were dispatched to take the pirates into custody, and an award was posted to the Yellow Rose's account. After the battle, Wiener was released from the airlock. Captain Hollis made sure Wiener heard the exchange. After the exchange with the Galactic Authority at the station, he smirked. "Well, you are free and clear of that. We can drop you off at the next stop with our cargo, or you can stay on, your choice." That said, Captain Hollis returned to the bridge, leaving Wiener to wonder about his options. He made his way to the nearest viewport and stared out, getting a last look at the broken pirate ship. These humans were not merchants or diplomats, they were something else entirely.